Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Eric Heegaard. You're listening to the GynoCast. I'm here with my boss, my buddy, my wing person, Twila Dang. And we are on a bit of a hiatus, but we wanted to leave you with something to think about.
Indeed.
Just a little bit of mind candy or mind fly, mental floss. And so we're just going to kind of tease some different subjects. And so today I thought we would talk just briefly about how do you communicate with your partner about sexually transmitted infections.
Yeah.
Because it can be a little dicey.
Okay.
And so I have this conversation all the time, and I hear things that are appalling and sometimes very inspirational. And so, for example, the most appalling thing is when a woman comes in who finds out that she's got a newly acquired sexually transmitted infection, and she is in a so-called, thinks she's in a monogamous
she thought she was in a monogamous relationship.
And her partner has said nothing about it, and she has to have the uncomfortable conversation of kind of, putting the heat on.
I know
nobody likes that.
I know several women that's happened to as well.
And I've also had people who, I find frankly inspirational where, I've had multiple times when I've had a woman say, my boyfriend or partner or ex-partner came up to my door looking like he was, he'd seen a ghost and said, I have been diagnosed with this. I want you to go get tested. When there was nothing but downside to him.
Sharing that information.
But it was purely out of concern for their partner. The whole spectrum of human behavior there. And so it's just one of these things that as we know more about disease, it gets to be a little bit more complicated because in the old days, we couldn't test for herpes. Mm-hmm. We couldn't test for human papillomavirus. People knew what the big ones were, like if you had herpes or you had gonorrhea or
syphilis.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it depends on, some of these things have different life cycles that can make themselves more apparent at different times. But oftentimes there can be long periods of time when there's no clinical manifestation and you don't know if you're getting exposed or not. But, and also things like, for example, chlamydia, it sucks to get chlamydia. It's incredibly rampant, but also you can get treated with an antibiotic and it is gone. It's very sensitive to antibiotics, chlamydia is. And so that's a very different thing than being exposed to a partner that may have herpes or HPV or, God forbid, something like HIV.
Yeah,
which,
absolutely.
Even though it's almost become a treatable condition, it's still a chronic condition, and it's very dangerous.
Yeah.
And so I'm having this more as being a discussion because I'm not exactly sure what the right way to approach this is, except that I think it kind of falls into two categories. One is you got to protect yourself. We talk about this a lot. You got to protect yourself and assume that really with any new partner that they have been exposed to something. Even if they're tested.
Well, don't they? What's the adage? It's the person that you're sleeping with. You're essentially sleeping with the last 7 people they slept with.
Yeah.
And then the last 7 people, each of those people slept with. So it's kind of an ongoing chain of exposure. So you have to be smart from the very beginning.
That's right. And nobody, I haven't found a man yet who really wants to use a condom. And I don't think a lot of women, want to use condoms that much either. It's not a terribly popular form of birth control or protection, but it is the one thing that works.
Right, it's a barrier.
And, especially if you have more than one partner.
Well, see, I have a question, though, because I think some of this gets here. I think here's where it starts to get really tricky, especially for, like, the millennial folk and, those that are sort of
swiping left and swiping right.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have a large segment of that population have grown up in a time and place where the definition of what sex is very different. Right. So they might not be engaging in, traditional, what we would consider penetrative sex, but they are, doing oral sex. They are trying to use what they consider alternatives to sex. I've met far too many young people under the age of 25 that think that anal sex is not actually sex because it's not sex with penis and vagina. But you're still exposing yourself because they're thinking you can't get pregnant, so that means you're fine. Right. And really, it means exactly the opposite. You can't get pregnant, but you're exposing yourself to all of these different things.
That's right.
And you're not even considering what you're exposing yourself to.
That's right. And you have to just remember that what you can see doesn't necessarily let you know what's underneath the surface or in the blood.
Right.
And virtually, you can have somebody can have chlamydia and have a subclinical form of it that can last for years and years and years. So the man may not know it, or the woman may not know it, and unknowingly transfer to her partner. And so it is important to be checked, and to have your partner checked, and to be careful, because you really can't tell. And many of these things, especially men, seem to be much more able to kind of function with a subclinical form of different things like herpes or chlamydia or gonorrhea, and they may not have any significant discharge or pain or anything, and yet they're carrying it and transmitting it, including HPV, which is probably the biggest one.
Explain a little bit about the difference between, like, when you say subclinical. What does that mean? Meaning
that there's no clinical manifestation. So you have the disease. So, for example, if a person has chlamydia and it's sitting around, and in a woman it can be in the cervix, it can be in worst case scenarios ascend up into the fallopian tubes and cause damage there, and they may not notice anything. They may not have any fever, any chills, any abdominal pain. Meanwhile, it can be kind of wreaking havoc in there, and so that's what I mean, that the disease is there, but there's nothing that's coming out as a red flag screaming, there's an infection going on. If a woman has a foul-smelling green discharge and pain, and that's pretty obvious that there's an infection going on there, and that it's transmittable. But a lot of these things can be transmitted and nobody knows. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so those are the dangerous ones. So men seem to, you can have herpes, you can have HPV, you can have chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, all these things, and not know it, and HIV as well. And so it's important, if you're in a new relationship, or if you're just in maybe what you would define as a non-traditional relationship, maybe you're not mutually exclusive or whatever, that people take care of yourself, take care of your partners, get tested. And so, but by being tested, it leads to difficult conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for example, many times when we do a pap smear, we will test for human papillomavirus, because that is the virus that causes, for the most part, virtually all cervical cancers, right? Mm-hmm. There's types that are much more aggressive and more likely to cause cervical cancer, and many types that are not. But let's say we do a pap smear, and the pap smear is normal, meaning there's no suggestion of precancer or cancer on the cells of the cervix, mm-hmm. but the human papillomavirus comes back positive for one of the high-risk strains, and you're in a relationship. What do you do? How do you have that conversation? Because a lot of people think, well, if it comes back positive, well, either they've been cheating. That's the first thing.
Yeah, they assume it's something happened in the immediate.
Yeah, or that they're a lot of people just feel, and this is a terrible kind of thing that they put on themselves, but they feel dirty.
They feel shame.
They feel shame.
Yeah, they feel like they're ashamed of the behavior that caused this to happen.
Right, yeah. and so I end up spending a lot of time talking to people about this, just trying to normalize things, because, and that is, and if there's anything else you got from this conversation, is that we have to realize that if you're looking for a partner that hasn't been exposed to anything, it's hard to find.
Yeah,
because if you're alive and have been sexually active, there's a very, very, very good chance you've been exposed to HPV.
Right,
and so. And you can have HPV for a long time, and it can rear its ugly head and then go away and be suppressed. And so just because a woman, for example, got positive for a high-risk HPV does not mean that she's been cheating.
Right.
Or that her partner has been cheating, and it could have been from a sexual relationship from years ago.
Right, and it doesn't even necessarily have to point to the fact that they have been, like, overly what you would consider as overly sexual act. They may have not have had like multiple partners, right, or engaged in risky behavior. They may have just been with one partner, and that partner just happened to expose them.
That's right. And so it's just important that I think that people talk about this and realize how common these infections are. And just because you don't have any symptoms of it doesn't mean you're not carrying it. And just because your partner maybe is positive for herpes or HPV doesn't mean that person is promiscuous or necessarily engaging in risky behavior. And that goes into a whole other conversation about why do we label certain things as acceptable and other things that's
exactly
shaming people for this behavior or others, and that's a different conversation. But
I think we should actually talk a little bit about the actual mechanics of a conversation like that. Like, I would say it's at least from my perspective, I think it's important if you're having this conversation that you're straightforward, that you're honest, that you don't sort of beat around the bush and start trying to explain all these things. Just be very upfront and give the person the information they need, especially if it's something that's going to require them to be tested. Come with information. Like, don't just say, I got this. I don't know how it happened. I don't even know how this works. Like, by the time you get to the point where you have to have a conversation with a partner, you should have and probably have received from your doctor some sort of paperwork or something explaining exactly what's going on with your body, exactly what you need to do. Share that information with your partner. Get a second set of information to give to your partner so that they kind of know, at least on the surface, this is what I may potentially be dealing with. Encourage them to go to the doctor. Maybe offer to go with them to the doctor because this is now something that you're both going through together and you need to be supportive. And most of all, you have to understand that if you're in the position where you have to have this uncomfortable conversation, that you need to make sure that you're being really respectful of the emotions that are going to be involved. Yeah. Yes, it might have been something that blindsided you or something that upset you or something that that you don't quite know how to process. And the immediate reaction of someone who was to get upset is to get defensive. Yeah. Really and truly make sure that you're always being really mindful that if you're the person that has to initiate this conversation, that you're scared, but the other person is probably terrified because they just don't know what's going on.
That's right.
And now you've just told them something that you've at least had a little time to adjust to.
That's right.
So, give them kind of a chance to, if they have to sort of go in the rafters for a minute and come back down, or they need to calm, they're upset for a minute and then they calm down. You may even have to let them go away and process, then come back and have a conversation when they can cool off a bit and really need to, and they may ask you difficult questions. You need to answer those questions. That is not the time to decide, I'm not going to tell you about all my previous history. You don't need to know all that. No, tell them what they need to know so that they understand what risk they're under, so that they're more empowered to make decisions about their own health. And then if there's a possibility that you want this relationship to continue, so that they can find a path to work past it, because there is a certain amount of forgiveness that has to be extended when something like this happens. If you expose somebody to something, they're going to be upset with you, even if they know it's out of your control. You have to give them the opportunity to process it so that they can get back to a point where you can go through this together or stay in a relationship if that's your choice.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, again, it is important to just come out with the information, be honest with what's going on. Also, it's important to educate yourself and for your partner to be educated, because you can't really have the conversation if you're not educated about the realities of the stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I would encourage people to go to the Center for Disease Control website or the American College of OBGYN. There's information on these different diseases and what impacts they can have. Because, and I will tell you that if your partner is having this conversation with you, you should be coming from it, or coming to it from the position of information, and realizing that if you are looking for somebody who has had exposure to nothing, that is a very rare circumstance in this day and age. And people who are getting into relationships, marrying, or getting into relationships in later parts of their life, or they may be divorced and going back on, trying to get into relationships. That you just have to realize this stuff is out there. And these are the ones that we know about. There's probably many, many, many other things that we don't even know about, and we don't even know how to test for it. And so, again, if you're alive and you've been sexually active, or if you've touched anybody, you've been exposed to microbials of one way or the other. And so protect yourself, inform yourself, and be honest with your partner. And if you need to, I've had people do this, have come in and sat down with me, and we have gone over and talked about this, because there's nothing that makes me more angry when I hear, well, my boyfriend decided to end the relationship because he found out that I had herpes. That is naive and ignorant. I had a 65-year-old woman one time. Her husband died about 5 years older, prior to that, and she had a gentleman friend from across the fence who used to lean his head over and say hello, and they would talk about the flowers and the gardening, and one thing led to another, and they got in a relationship, and she wanted to, she'd read about this, she wanted to be careful, got tested for everything. She turned out to be positive for herpes type 2, genital type herpes. She felt like just let it go through.
Terrible.
She felt terrible. Mm-hmm. And we talked about it. she didn't know whether she'd gotten it from this new partner, whether she'd gotten it from a previous partner from 60 years ago, from her husband who'd gotten it from somebody else. But it was very unlikely that, in having the conversation, that it was a new infection. She'd probably had it her whole life, or for decades and decades. And instead of feeling filthy, she needed to educate herself and to try to normalize the fact that, we live in a world that we are being exposed to things all the time. And unless you want to wrap yourself up in plastic or wear a rubber suit, Twila, I'm not sure where can you get a good rubber suit.
Oh, I know.
I'm sure you do. So educate yourself, be forgiving of yourself, and communicate with your partner. Protect yourself. Be safe. Thank you for listening.
And we'll be back soon.